Life on my family farm had always been simple. Mornings were spent tending to the chickens and maintaining the crops, afternoons on repairs, and evenings enjoying the quiet, rural beauty of the land. It was a peaceful life, until that blasted letter changed everything. "Excuse me, Ma?" I called out from the barn, an envelope in my hand. Mrs. Pepper, our playful barn cat, brushed against my leg as I unfolded the notice. Its contents made my blood boil. The bold header read, "Black Valley HOA Official Notification." It went something like this. Due to ongoing concerns regarding insufficient parking for our neighborhood recreational field, we have designated your farm property as an overflow parking lot. Please ensure your driveway and surrounding land meet the proper maintenance standards to accommodate vehicles. Failure to comply may result in penalties. Penalties. Parking lot. On my farm. I crumpled the letter and glanced over at the row of solar panels mounted on the hill, glinting in the sunlight. If they thought they could roll over me, they had another thing coming. The HOA cops appeared before I even had a chance to respond to their ridiculous notice. 3 SUVs packed with clipboard-wielding representatives pulled into my gravel driveway one sunny afternoon, kicking up clouds of dust as they parked haphazardly in front of my barn. "Excuse me," a stern woman in a plaid shirt hollered as she stepped out of the lead vehicle. Her name tag read, "Karen Simmons, HOA Vice President." Oh, of course it did. I walked out, wiping my hands on my overalls. "Can I help you folks?" "You must be Mr. Davis," she said, eyeing me with the straight-lipped disapproval city folks reserve for dirt-covered farmers like me. "We've received complaints about the state of this property being unsafe for the public, given its new HOA designation." I blinked. "Unsafe? Public? Mom, this is private land. Nobody's parking here unless you plan to wrangle my cows while you're at it." Karen sniffed as her clipboard-wielding minions fanned out across my property, snapping photos of my barn and chicken coops like they were investigating a crime scene. "Mr. Davis, the new HOA plans make it very clear. Your land sits within the community boundaries, and as such, it is subject to our rules. We've decided this farm will serve as overflow parking for neighborhood events. You should be honored." "Honored?" I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. "Take a look around, Miss Karen. Do you see sidewalks? Lamp posts? Heck, this ain't even city water. How do you figure I'm in some HOA?" Karen smirked. "The association's boundaries were expanded effective last spring, meaning your property now falls under our jurisdiction." What she didn't realize was that while she was babbling on about jurisdiction, I'd spotted something critical. Her clipboard held a poorly drawn map with a suspicious black line penciled over my land. Just as I suspected, this wasn't about parking. It was about control. "Listen," I growled. "Whatever maps you're playing with, this here's a working farm. I'm not bowing to some manufactured boundaries." Karen only raised an eyebrow. "Then you leave us no choice. Prepare for action." And with that, she marched back to her car, leaving me staring at a trail of tire tracks on my dirt driveway. Action, as it turned out, meant harassment. By the end of the week, signs mysteriously appeared next to my cornfields, reading, "HOA designated parking area. No farming beyond this point." The next morning, a construction crew rolled up without warning and began roping off part of my front yard, insisting they were ordered to create clearly defined parking rows. I sent them packing with a well-aimed shovel toward their truck's side mirror. Karen wasn't done, though. She sent letters every other day, tacking on fee after bogus fee for alleged violations, none of which made any sense. Grass too long near the barn. Non-compliance fine. Chickens not meeting HOA-approved coop designs. Non-compliance fine. My personal favorite? A $250 fine for my tractor, branded as an unregistered off-road vehicle. What Karen and her cronies didn't know, however, was this farm wasn't just some patch of dirt. Thanks to my investment in solar panels and the small wind turbine in the back field, not only was the property self-sufficient, I also happened to supply electricity to the entire Black Valley community, including Karen's HOA office. It was time Karen learned who she was messing with. The final straw came when I walked outside one evening to find a dozen cars parked in my field. Some kind of community soccer game had overrun the recreational area, so Karen decided my property was fair game. The cars tore up my grass and wrecked my irrigation setup. "All right, that's it," I muttered, pulling my gloves off. I stalked up to my utility shed, where my energy monitoring system was parked. One flick of a switch labeled Central Line Override, and the flow of electricity to Black Valley's HOA headquarters stopped dead in its tracks. I called Angela, my longtime friend and the city utilities coordinator. "Angie," I said casually, "you mind doing me a favor? Push a maintenance alert on the HOA's circuit." "You got it," she replied with a laugh in her voice. Within hours, chaos erupted. Phone calls flooded the HOA office. Karen stormed onto my property the next morning, clipboard in hand, cheeks redder than a ripe tomato. "Mr. Davis, what is the meaning of this?" I leaned against my tractor, arms crossed, a smirk playing on my lips. "Karen, funny thing about electricity. Wouldn't you know it? The farm you're trying to turn into a parking lot happens to power the HOA's shiny little office. Guess you're officially in the dark now." "You can't do this," she sputtered. "Oh, can't I?" I said, feigning innocence. "See, Karen, I never signed your HOA agreement. And private property laws, they're a little more binding than your clipboard rules. Speaking of which," I pointed at the cars still littering my field, "pretty sure that's a violation." She opened her mouth, no doubt ready to spit out some half-baked excuse, but nothing came out. For once, Karen was at a loss for words. The blackout lasted 2 days. That's all it took for Karen and her loyalists to fold under the weight of angry residents. Without power to run their office or printers, the HOA couldn't issue new fines or process appeals. When Karen returned the keys to my property gate later that week, her eyes shot daggers at me. "This isn't over, Mr. Davis," she hissed. "Oh, I'm sure it ain't," I said, tipping my hat. "But next time you come onto my land, I suggest you bring cookies, not lawsuits." The signs disappeared. The letters stopped. And Black Valley's parking issue was miraculously resolved once they realized I wasn't about to hand over my farm without a fight. Later, as I leaned against the barn, watching the cows graze under the glow of the wind turbine, Angela pulled up in her pickup truck. "You're becoming a legend, you know," she said, passing me a lemonade. "Legend, huh?" I said with a chuckle. She grinned. "Karen's got a new nickname around town. They're calling her Powerless Patty." I laughed so hard Mrs. Pepper bolted into the hayloft. Life on the farm was good again, and you better believe no one tried turning it into a parking lot after that. Karen may have stormed off my property, but her dramatic retreat wasn't the end of things. Like a bad weed, the HOA's arrogance kept cropping back up in unexpected ways. Word of my electricity standoff spread like wildfire through Black Valley, earning me the reluctant admiration of my neighbors. At first, people honked their horns as they drove past the farm, giving me enthusiastic thumbs-ups. A few even dropped by with homemade pies as a token of solidarity. About time someone put Karen and her cronies in their place. One elderly gentleman crowed as he handed over a rhubarb pie. But for every slice of gratitude, there was also stirred resentment. Karen's loyalists whispered behind closed doors about how my reckless stunt jeopardized the community. One evening, I walked out to find a snarky note taped to my mailbox, reading, "Congratulations on ruining neighborhood harmony." Harmony? What harmony? Karen herself seemed to be biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, a procession of HOA board members rolled onto my street, led by Karen in her shiny new convertible. This time, she brought an ally with her. "Mr. Davis," she said curtly as she stepped onto my driveway, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Behind her stood a sharply dressed man with slicked back hair, carrying an expensive leather briefcase. "Meet Charles Weaver, our legal consultant. We're here to inform you that according to a new interpretation of the bylaws, your farm violates zoning regulations. Agriculture, after all, is so 19th century, don't you think?" Charles gave me a smug smile. Karen looked like she was waiting for me to crumble. Instead, I laughed. "You can interpret bylaws all you want," I replied, leaning leisurely against my tractor. "But I've been running this farm long before you tried to claim it as a parking lot. And I can show you the deeds and permits to prove it." Karen's smirk faltered as Angela, my city utilities buddy, appeared from the barn, holding a manila folder. "Funny you should bring that up," Angela chimed in, handing me a stack of official-looking papers. "Because I just spoke with the county clerk, and guess what, Karen? This land is zoned as agricultural, and nothing you do can change that without a full vote from the county council. That's public record, in case you were wondering." Karen blinked as color drained from her face. Charles cleared his throat awkwardly, muttering something about needing to reread the bylaws. They didn't leave skid marks on my gravel driveway, but they came close. Karen's latest failure divided Black Valley even further. Some residents rallied behind her, insisting the HOA's heavy-handed approach was necessary to maintain order. Others loudly condemned her, pointing out how much of the HOA funds had been wasted on frivolous battles. An HOA is supposed to support the community, not harass its members. Jim, a grumpy yet practical neighbor, barked during a heated town meeting. Even people who once blindly followed Karen began to question her motives. It didn't help that Angela shared a few accidentally leaked HOA financial records showing Karen's reimbursement requests for spa days and business lunches suspiciously held at high-end restaurants. To save face, Karen hosted a community appreciation barbecue, inviting everyone to her backyard. It was supposed to be her grand comeback moment, but the turnout was light. Most folks came for the free food, avoided Karen's gaze, and left without saying goodbye. One breezy Saturday morning, I was fixing the chicken coop when Brady, a former HOA enforcer and Karen's one-time protege, showed up looking sheepish. He'd been keeping a low profile lately, but now seemed ready to talk. "Mr. Davis," he began, shuffling nervously, "I owe you an apology for all of it. The fines, the parking thing, everything. I didn't know what I was really signing on for when Karen brought me on board. But once I saw how you stood up to her, it got me thinking." "Thinking, huh?" I replied, raising an eyebrow. "What are you thinking now?" "I want to help," he said suddenly, his shoulders squaring. "Look, I know Karen's planning one last stunt to try and take you down. She's got Weaver working overtime to twist the bylaws into something she can use against you. But I still have access to the internal files, and I found something important." With that, Brady handed me a flash drive. "There's evidence in here. Sketchy contracts, misused funds. Even a record of a meeting where Karen literally said, and I quote, 'This farm is a gold mine, and we can figure out the details later.'" I couldn't help but grin. "Brady, I reckon this is the start of a beautiful friendship." The moment Karen filed her latest legal motion against me, I was ready. At the next HOA meeting, Angela and Brady joined me at the back of the room, armed with the flash drive, printed records, and a projector. "Before you take any action against my farm," I said, addressing the room with deliberate calm, "I think the community deserves to see how their HOA dues have actually been spent." Click. Angela started the presentation. The room went silent as line after line of damning evidence flashed on the screen. Bogus fines, kickbacks to Weaver, Karen's personal expenses, and, most scandalous of all, an entry titled Private Fund Allocation for Luxury HOA Retreat. Karen's face went pale, then red, then back to pale. Her loyalists squirmed in their seats. It was over. By the end of the night, Karen announced her resignation. Her loyalists melted away, and the HOA board dissolved. A temporary council of actual neighbors was formed, prioritizing transparency and sensible rules that respected everyone's property rights. Brady emerged as an unlikely hero, earning back the community's trust by helping clean up the HOA mess. Angela, ever the pragmatic friend, stayed on as a consultant, making sure no future power-hungry leader could exploit the bylaws like Karen had. As for me, I went back to farming, richer in pies, gratitude, and the satisfaction of knowing no one would park on my land again. Even Karen, now relocated to a new zip code, left my life for good. Though every so often, when I flip the switch on my wind turbine, I think back to her face when the power went out. Call me petty, but it still makes me smile. With Karen gone, you'd think peace would settle over Black Valley like a soft summer breeze. But change, as I quickly learned, moves about as fast as molasses in January. The HOA board's sudden implosion left behind an organization more chaotic than a chicken coop at feeding time. At the next town meeting, folks packed into the old church hall, buzzing with excitement, complaints, and, most of all, uncertainty. Brady, freshly minted as the interim HOA chairman, stood at the podium, nervously adjusting his tie. I know trust was broken, he began, his voice trembling slightly, but I promise you this new board will focus on fairness, transparency, and, not turning anyone's property into a parking lot. The room broke into scattered chuckles, though Jim, the neighborhood's self-appointed critic, immediately barked out, "Good luck with that." I sat towards the back, chewing on a blade of grass I'd carried in from the farm. Angela leaned over to whisper, "Think they'll pull it together?" "Not sure," I admitted. "But at least Brady's trying. That's more than most." While Brady worked to rebuild the HOA from the ground up, Karen's influence lingered like a stale odor in a closed-up attic. Several of her loyalists, despite being utterly humiliated during her downfall, refused to accept defeat. "You've ruined this community," barked Helen, her most vocal supporter, as she cornered me at the local farmers market. "Without Karen's leadership, our property values are going to plummet. And it's all your fault, Mr. I control the electricity." I calmly rearranged the jars of honey on my stall table. "Helen," I said, leaning in slightly, "property values tend to fall when people like Karen sue their neighbors into the ground. You're welcome to buy some honey, though. Might sweeten you up." The market-goers within earshot burst into laughter. Helen stormed off without another word, her face as red as a ripe tomato. But cutting words weren't the only tactic Karen's former followers tried. One evening, I spotted a strange SUV idling near my fields. Its headlights switched off as soon as I stepped onto the porch. I wasn't worried. I had Mrs. Pepper, a flashlight, and a security camera mounted on the barn. But it was clear not everyone was ready to move on. If passive-aggressive notes and late-night stakeouts weren't enough, the HOA's tangled legal dealings continued to haunt the community. Take, for instance, the property maintenance contracts Karen had signed with companies like Valley Landscaping Solutions. Turns out, Karen had negotiated hefty payouts for services no one needed. Trimming bushes, most of which didn't even exist. A yearly pond fountain cleaning, for a pond we obviously didn't have. These contracts, riddled with fine print, were almost impossible to break without incurring major financial penalties. Angela and I spent hours combing through the documents, trying to find loopholes. Brady, bless his heart, showed up with cookies and coffee one evening and stayed until midnight, highlighting every suspicious clause in bright yellow. "It's like she was planning to bankrupt the neighborhood," Angela muttered. "Or herself," I said. "Guess that's what happens when you think rules only apply to other people." The legal mess took months to sort out, but with determination and Angela's expertise, we managed to renegotiate most of the contracts, saving the community thousands. Despite the headaches, something surprising began to happen. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood started coming together. Without Karen's iron grip, people who'd barely spoken to each other began collaborating. Families volunteered to repaint community signs. Teens helped mow lawns for elderly residents, refusing payment with sheepish grins. Even Helen, after some time, and maybe some honey, thawed just enough to wave at me from across the street. Brady proved himself to be a steady, honest leader. At one town gathering, he unveiled a proposal to draft entirely new HOA bylaws, with input from every resident. No more backroom deals, he promised. No more catching folks off guard with fines. This HOA belongs to everyone. The proposal was met with cautious applause. Later, Susan, one of Karen's quieter ex-loyalists, approached me during the break. "You know," she said, wringing her hands, "Karen hated you for a reason. You don't back down." "Guilty as charged," I replied. She smiled faintly. "Keep an eye on Brady for us. He's a good kid, but he looks up to you." Months later, Black Valley felt different. Not perfect, mind you. New squabbles arose every week, whether it was about whose dog was barking too loud or where someone could park their RV. But these were the normal, harmless kind of disputes neighborhoods have when people actually care about each other. The new bylaws, finalized after countless debates, were simple, fair, and most importantly, enforceable. Brady's leadership, guided by input from neighbors like Jim, Susan, and even a begrudging Helen, earned praise, even from skeptics like me. To celebrate, the HOA hosted a potluck on the recreational field, the very site of that first ill-fated parking fiasco. Tables laden with casseroles, desserts, and fried chicken lined the space, and laughter filled the air. Angela nudged me as I took a bite of someone's delicious peach cobbler. "Bet you never thought you'd see this day," she said. "Never in a million years," I admitted, watching Brady and the neighbors chatting happily. Karen, of course, stayed out of sight, though rumors spread that she'd moved to a gated community in the next county. Occasionally, the faint sound of her name in hushed conversation would drift through town, but no one seemed eager to dwell on her reign. Life on the farm went back to normal. My goats, chickens, and cows roamed freely. The fields stayed lush, and the solar panels hummed contentedly under the sun. Not a single car dared park on my property again. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, sipping sweet tea as Mrs. Pepper purred on my lap. Brady pulled up in his truck, hopping out with a small basket. "Fresh apples," he said with a grin. "Thought you'd like some." I accepted the basket and gestured for him to take a seat. "You're doing all right, Brady," I said after a long moment. "Better than I expected." He laughed, leaning back. "Guess I learned from the best, Chief of Electricity." We shared a chuckle, the late summer sun casting golden hues across the fields. Black Valley may still have its quirks, but it was home again. And if the HOA or anyone else dared test me in the future, well,